Yeah, so this Borderless is really a name that's put to the new way that New Wilderness Project is really approaching both the art and the education. And I know you've been involved in that. You've been a huge inspiration for us moving into that space.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear your kind of excitement and your ideas around that connection with the idea of borderlessness.
Yeah. I think that the more I think about the new focus of New Wilderness Project on borderless, and originally I kind of wondered what that meant. I mean, don't we need kind of limits? Don't we need lines? Don't we, And then I started thinking, no, I mean, this is really a powerful metaphor again, this idea of borderless, because people in power are invested in keeping these lines between us. Those lines were drawn through wars. These lines that we call nations, they were drawn because of power. And they were drawn because people won a war. They killed people, and they're vested in those lines. And the lines mean nothing, because the lines actually, ethnic groups, racial groups, tribal groups move across those, animals move across those, the air and the water move across those. When you look at the planet from space, it doesn't have those lines on it. It's all artificial. It's an artificially structured system to keep people away from each other. The greatest fear that people with power have actually is that we will come together across our differences as a planet. If you look at the conservative Christian movement, which is in so many ways antagonistic to the social justice movement, it's unfortunate, because if people only listened to the Jesus words, they would realize that he was a revolutionary. I mean, the problem with Christianity is they don't listen to Jesus, right? So, but what is he talking about? He's talking about breaking down barriers. He's talking about breaking down the barriers between people. The same thing that we have now. So the fear is that we will actually start connecting across socioeconomic, gender, sexual identity, religion, language, and connecting with each other, particularly around labor and the labor movement. The most threatening thing to capitalism is an international labor movement that would link working people across the planet and across their races. And we don't keep them separate anymore. They're unified by their desire to get their own share, in this world, to have the good of the many over the greed of the few. So I think that's the power of borderless. And as we have kids think about that, it's a revolutionary thing. That we're raising a generation of kids who will not be limited by these psychological, political, sociological barriers that have been structured to serve power. They'll actually have this sense of connection with people. There's no reason I would kill or denigrate a person because of their difference, because we're both human beings and we have no borders between us. That's the most threatening thing to people in power.
And speak again, because I think the chair was squeaking. What's this, about the fact that we've been power been flowing across
borders. Talk about that.
Those borders have been.
And again, if you look at the issue of privilege related to borders, power, privilege, money, wealth, and capital already flow freely across the planet. Information is flowing freely. A lot of people try to stop the information, but the money and the capital and the power moves freely. The international capitalist system, it's moving fine across all these borders. And a lot of those folks are trying to keep the people from moving across those borders, so we can keep these isolated folks here because that's a cheap labor source or whatever. So the power already moves freely. And the movement of borderless, I think, that you're doing with New Wilderness Project, the revolutionary part of that is the fact that we want to have the people moving freely also across those borders, and also people refusing to be limited by the borders of difference that have been created, that keep them separate from each other. That great unifying force, which was Martin Luther King's vision originally too, which was bringing black people and white people, poverty, working class folks together to address a system that was oppressing both of them. And racism was just used as a tool to keep them apart from each other, really. And so the vested interest of people in power was to keep white folks racist enough that they would not connect on their economic self-interest with poor black and brown people. So borderless has huge political implications, as well as implications for education and for kids and for connection. We can love each other across all these lines, and we can connect with each other, and we can organize with each other across all those lines.
That's going to be awesome. Can you speak to the imperative to really connect the environmental movement with the social justice movement in these times, and maybe if you can, how Borderless and New Wilderness Project kind of makes that connection or that leap?
I think if you look at the environmental movement, for too long we've been really separated in the sense that the environmental movement has been primarily a white movement, and there's been a lot written about that. And so I think part of the borderless breaking down is helping us see that that's really a self-interest for all of us across our differences. That the environment is, if you look at the air, we all breathe it. And in fact, in the environmental justice movement, people of color and vulnerable economic groups are the ones that get most of the pollution and the negative stuff coming on them. So that if we break that kind of distinction down, and the environment we live in, and Paul Gorski is one that's great at speaking about this, that the way we treat the animals and the way we treat the environment is very reflective of how we treat each other. And you cannot change one without the other. We cannot get more humane with each other as human beings if we aren't more humane with the living world and the environment and the planet that we live on. Those are intimately connected. And again, if we break down the barriers of race, which has separated the environmental movement as a white thing, and the social justice movement more as a poor people or people of color thing, that we actually link that up. And so Borderless is very powerful there in terms of bringing those different movements together.
This will be the last question.
Okay.
I want to hear about our connection to the earth and to each other on a spiritual level. Like, where can we go as humanity in this century? If we were to look at the best of where we could go, what would it look like?
Yeah. Well, I think that from the bigger...
This is just your vision.
No, it's a bigger vision point of view that, I mean, I kind of honed my social justice thing in the race equity movement and Black Power movement in the 1960s, civil rights movement. And that's pretty much politically and race-based. And then the second phase of my work was getting deeply involved in more indigenous cultural issues and going to World Indigenous Conferences for several years. They're held every 3 years, and I went to 5 or 6 of those across the planet. And that has helped me see the linking of the earth to the political movement. The issues are very similar in terms of oppression, power, racism issues with indigenous people and, say, African American people in this country. But what the indigenous movement helped me see is the connection to the earth. That one of the ways that we bring ourselves together, again, it's a borderless theme, is that we're all connected to this planet and the caring for this planet. And not to over-romanticize it, but there's a very strong indigenous sense of earth as mother, earth as source, earth as vital to our survival as a people. And the notion of sacred space and the protection of sacred space and the honoring of that sacred space, that we are totally dependent on this planet. And this is something that the corporate world and its destruction of the planet has no sense of. So by breaking down that distance and that lack of understanding and that sort of use of the planet only for extraction and reinforcing and replacing that with the notion of earth as source, not as resource, but as source, that can bring together this movement too, the political aspects of the movement, and it's a deeply spiritual connection to the earth. We're all children of the same mother. That breaks down the racist thing right there.